Hi folks, and welcome to the first of my videos answering your questions. Now, it doesn't seem as though at this time I have much in the way of a theistic audience, but not to worry, we have enough questions to get the ball rolling, so here goes. Now, so that my answers actually make sense, I'll have to give a brief account of the version of or notion of atheism that I actually work with. I don't subscribe to or advocate the increasingly popular notion of atheism as a mere absence of belief. Whilst people are perfectly entitled to use that definition, I find that it doesn't have much utility. And I happily concede that the notion of atheism that I prefer contains a certain bias. My purpose and primary goals and values all revolve around consciousness and what I perceive as the fulfillment of the promises of consciousness. And so my preference for definitions of things like atheism is somewhat informed by those things. So the version of atheism that I prefer is that atheism is the conscious rejection of the entire paradigm of theism and all of the falsities contained therein. Now, that particular notion of atheism does not entail a complete rejection of the term God. The term God can and mostly does refer to false ideas, but it needn't exclusively or necessarily do so. And I'll have more to say on that particular point in answer to one of your questions. The first of which comes from Godless Youth, who posted, "Is it true that there are really no philosophic consequences of atheism? Anything that follows is just incidental?" I think that is pretty much true with respect to the notion of atheism as being just a mere absence of belief. I mean, that kind of atheism can't really have implications or consequences because it isn't really anything at all. But whilst atheism, from my perspective at least, is not itself a philosophy or a specific worldview, it emerges out of philosophical thinking. So for the person who comes to their atheism through a process of thought, there will be certain consequences and implications, because if you remove all the prepackaged answers to life of theism, certain questions stand before you immediately. Questions of the nature of purpose and meaning and morality, and the essential question of the ultimate nature of reality itself. So for the person that arrives at atheism through the process of thought, there are naturally consequences and implications. I mean, you could think of atheism, and just bear with me here because I'm about to milk a metaphor dry. You could think of atheism as a stretch of road on the highway of thought, whose ultimate destination is philosophical and spiritual wisdom. Now, that stretch of road is not the destination itself, but it is very important and indeed necessary, with the exception of those people who have been able to miraculously teleport from their departure point to that destination. If you don't pass over that stretch of road at some point, you are simply not on that highway at all. But along that journey you see and experience certain interesting things. One of which is that occasionally you'll find yourself looking over to the side and you'll see, hurtling along the emergency road, a combi van full of theists, happily singing hymns, and they look over to you and give you a smile and a little wave, because they think they are on the highway. And it doesn't matter how much you yell or point or gesture, you will not be heeded, and they will eventually find themselves hurtling smack bang into a reinforced pile of dirt. But the other thing you notice about that highway is that it's scattered with little sort of truck stops and roadside diners. And because the journey can be, fairly tiring at times, you'll find yourself occasionally pulling into one of these diners and you mosey on in and you look up at the menu and you think to yourself, well, you know what, maybe I'll just try a Buddha burger with the never-ending fries. Or maybe a stack of positivist pancakes in science syrup. Or maybe just a toasty little chunk of New Age waffle. But you have to be somewhat careful because these tasty little morsels can be kind of addictive. And indeed many people find themselves never ever leaving these little roadside diners. They sit there and gorge themselves on these belief burgers, and they end up becoming these hopeless obese creatures that couldn't get back to their car even if they wanted to. Even when the chef comes out and confesses that his burgers are made of bullshit, because they can't get back to their cars, they're forced to suspend disbelief and continue gorging themselves on these belief burgers. But in short, for a thoughtful person, atheism has consequences. The next question comes from 1140 Cecile, who posted, "Do you ever get annoyed that the term atheism implies a belief system because of the ism included in the word?" It doesn't really annoy me personally, but I can understand how many atheists would be frustrated by it. But, there's really only two types of people who insist on imposing the notion of a belief system onto atheism: the stupid and the dishonest. The stupid cannot help themselves, and the dishonest will not help themselves. I'm not sure that there's much that any of us can do about that except to simply correct the error whenever we see it. Now, you also asked why we don't have terms that specifically designate our non-belief in other things, such as Santa Claus. I think the fairly obvious reason for that is that if we did, language would become ridiculous and overly cumbersome. The reason that we have the term atheism, and the reason that term is important, is because theism has been and continues to be such a powerful and ubiquitous theme in human experience. Indeed, atheism will continue to be an important term in our language for as long as the mimetic scourge of theism continues to exist. Jupaviv posted 3 questions, the first of which is, if a person does not believe in God's existence but does not absolutely know why God does not exist, can he then be called an atheist? In the popular version of atheism, yes. In mine, no. The second question was, if a person does not believe in God but believes in love or Santa Claus or equality or the difference between life and death or all of these, can he be considered an atheist? Well, my answer to that is yes, because atheism doesn't cover all false beliefs, or the absence of all false beliefs. Even though it would be nice to think that an atheist strives to eliminate falsity entirely from their lives, what you wrote there would really describe a philosopher, and not just an atheist. Thirdly, you asked, if a person does not believe in God but believes that science is the ultimate answer to everything, can he be considered an atheist? Again, within my version of atheism, I would say no, because if he thinks that science is the ultimate answer to everything, it's unlikely that he will have legitimate reasons for not believing in God, because only a foolish person could possibly believe that science is the ultimate answer to everything. Indeed, only a person who has no understanding of what science is and what its natural limitations are could possibly think such a thing. So, if such a person could be called an atheist at all, I'd have to label them a foolish atheist. B.C. Kilds wrote, it seems that there are 2 possible explanations for everything. Either something came from nothing or something always existed. Do you consider these explanations to be equally absurd? Well, no, I don't. I certainly consider something from nothing to be absurd. And indeed, absolute nothingness is not a coherent notion. The concept nothing can only exist in relation to the concept something. It has no meaning without that relation. So absolute nothingness is not even something that can be, let alone a state that can produce a something. Now, the alternative that reality has always been makes perfect sense to me. And if you stop and consider the nature of the question, where did everything come from? You'll see that it's actually not a meaningful or coherent question. It's a question for which there cannot, in fact, be an answer, because any proposed answer cannot be an answer at all. And the reason for that is fairly simple. Any supposed answer must of necessity be part of everything. The idea of an origin to everything is completely silly. This is just not a question that has any coherence, and cannot be asked meaningfully. You also ask, if all known laws of the universe have broken down at some point, how can we be sure of anything? How can we know, for instance, that simplicity has always begot complexity? The reason that we can know that is because it's essentially true by definition. The duality of simple and complex is a product of mind. Nature knows nothing about any such duality, other than through us. The judgments of simple and complex are those which emerge from a dualistic mind that engages in pattern recognition. So we can comfortably say that simplicity will always beget complexity, because that's precisely how our mind functions. It's a natural consequence of the way that a dualistic pattern-recognizing mind carves up reality. So in other words, it's true by definition precisely because these concepts emerge out of our own minds. Now you also ask, is God an ambivalent mad scientist? Are we gods? Will we be gods? That all depends on how you're defining God. If you define God as a being that creatively modifies some aspect of reality, then there can be all sorts of gods, and in a sense, we are, by dint of that description, a kind of god. And yes, it's possible, in a deistic sense, that what we refer to as the observable universe could be the creation of some incredibly powerful, advanced being. But that's an hypothesis about which I could frankly care less, because such a being would still be finite and subject to the basic principles of causation. The reality of that hypothesis would also say nothing to me about all the important and ultimate philosophic questions of the nature of existence, the ultimate nature of reality, the nature of purpose and meaning and morality, and the self, etc. So even if that scenario were theoretically true, I could frankly give a crap. Okay, so that's all I'll really have time to address properly in this particular video. In part 2, I'll be looking at questions about the utility of the term God, and also a question regarding the nature of formal debate, and maybe 1 or 2 other things. Thanks for your questions, and hope to see you in part 2. Bye for now.